I'm here to talk about triphasic approach for grappling athletes. Probably a little bit different to some of the content that Keir already has up. This is probably going to be a little bit more nuts and bolts, and we're just going to explore my application of the triphasic system to athletes. Talk about grappling athletes, the question is, well, what do we mean by a grappling athlete? And this effectively combative athletes that do not strike one another, and they generally will win a grappling match via a number of ways, either a points-based system, a pinfall, or a submission finish, depending on which sport we're talking about. And it's a very umbrella term, so we have a number of sports. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which has risen to prominence very recently, Judo, which is obviously a very traditional Olympic sport, Sambo, which is a different style of Russian jacket wrestling. We have both gi and no-gi grappling, and obviously traditional wrestling. Because I'm from the UK, we do not have a wrestling culture here like they do in the United States. So for all intents and purposes, I'll be discussing mainly the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and gi and no-gi style grapplers, because they make up the bulk of clients that I work with most of the time. And when we look at these types of athletes, they all possess a number of fairly similar physical qualities. Compared to striking athletes, they're generally shorter, they're stockier, they're heavier guys, and as we go on, it'll make sense, to some extent, why they're built like that. Most grappling sports require athletes to be physically strong, reasonably conditioned, and have an enormous amount of ability to absorb force as well as produce it. And this is the next thing, is that grappling sports express force in very different ways to, say, conventional field sports, in that they will have to produce force at very awkward positions, for instance lying on your back, from a deep squat or a half kneeling position, from lying on their front to lying on their side. So they have to express force in a unique number of ways, and quite often the way they express force can be in terms of isometric and eccentric contractions.
The nature of achieving victory outcomes varies from sport to sport. For instance, judo requires pinfalls, as does wrestling. Judo can also achieve victory through submission, although the only submissions are allowed are very, very limited. Whereas, for instance, in jiu-jitsu, the easiest way to achieve victory is through points win, but then you can also win via submission, which is the expectation. So hold downs and ground fighting are very important. This is where isometric strength, for instance, is very, very useful. The ability to develop what a lot of jiu-jitsu athletes call the squeeze, it's very important. Whereas obviously, wrestling athletes and judo athletes are looking to be very explosive on the feet, whereas jiu-jitsu players and sambo players, somewhere in between, they need to be explosive on the feet. And in pure straight jiu-jitsu, quite often being on the feet is purely a formality to getting to the floor. So having the athlete be able to fight off his back is also very important. Eccentric training quite often gets a bad rap in strength and conditioning circles. It's kind of the red-headed stepchild of movement tempos. They're very hard mentally and neurally, and they induce a lot of soreness, which is the main reason why a lot of coaches stay away from using them. The worry being that this soreness will impact technical practice. This can happen, so this is why communication with a coach is vitally important. Research, however, has shown extremely positive benefits of eccentric training. It's become rather more popular recently. There's a lot of research supporting it positively. Soreness can be worked around provided training is sequenced properly. The first session is generally when the athlete is worse. It brings a big stress response. But then we know that there's a subsequent protective effect from soreness thereafter.
Why triphasic training for grapplers? Well, I believe that the force expression is very congruent to grappling. So any of you who have ever grappled before will understand what I'm talking about. Winning or losing grappling can sometimes count on your ability to hold an isometric position, absorb force, and produce force. So grapplers probably one of the athletes that absorb the most eccentric and isometric force of most athletes, because they're having force applied to them by their opposition while they're also trying to apply force at the same time. So grappling athletes seem to possess motor qualities that sponge up eccentric and isometric methods. This is something Cal Dietz himself remarked on, saying that the wrestlers seem to really respond to this type of training. So I'm guessing it may be a genetic or phenotype or anthropometric thing that the people who are very good at grappling also happen to have excellent eccentric and isometric absorption, which makes sense. And the other thing is, a triphasic training, it's quite structured, and if you're an grappling athlete generally knows what competitions they've got coming up, so we can work on a structured competitive model, whereas for instance as MMA fighters get their fight dates announced and then we have to plan everything around that, of minimizing what might take up to 8 weeks and compress it down into 5 to 4 weeks. I've had guys who've done 3 weeks of supramaximal training post new PRs almost straight after. This may be some sort of potentiation effect, I'm not sure. It's something obviously we still need to figure out what's happening here. I've measured it, I've seen it happen, so definitely something going on that we need to figure out with compression of training. The other thing that happens is maximal muscular recruitment. Obviously supramaximal loads require very high levels of muscular recruitment. So much so I've included it twice apparently on this list. It's very taxing on the central nervous system, so this is generally, I'll apply this method furthest away from when athletes have to compete. So I'll try and communicate with the coach and just let them know, hey, we're going to be, for the next 2 weeks and then 4 weeks, we just need the athlete to sort of take it a little bit easier when it's rolling and sparring. Most coaches are very understanding and they let us do that. They understand that it's part of a process. And then with supramaximal training, it has to be realized through subsequent or concurrent concentric training. So we can mix in contrast methods or French contrast, that type of thing, in order to help realize sudden changes in eccentric strength, because obviously velocity is a specific adaptation. So if athletes are doing slow squats all the time, it's not going to help with their rate of force development in the long run. And the other thing is supramaximal training, provided we keep it alatic, so we can get strength-specific energy system adaptations. So this is why I prefer the bilateral safety bar squat over the unilateral one. I found the athletes were getting too gassy doing the unilateral split squat. They were getting tired, so they do one leg and be exhausted for the second leg. So I started doing the bilateral squat instead to keep energy system demand down. And obviously the other issue here is that this phase is purely systemic strength gain. This is very unsport specific. We're just taking a very simple squat pattern and just overloading it as much as we can get away with. So the changes are highly systemic. You'll talk to the athletes and ask them how they feel, and they pretty much tell you they feel it everywhere.
Thanks for watching this highlight clip. If you want to watch this entire presentation, head over to strengthcoachnetwork.com, and for $1, you can try out the whole site for 24 hours, no strings attached, and get access to this presentation and hundreds more just like it.